Welcome to EJB Talks, Rutgers Blaustein School experts in policy, planning, and health, where we talk with our faculty and staff experts, as well as students, about how the fields of public policy, urban planning, public health, health administration, and public and urban informatics affect your lives. Welcome to another episode of EJB Talks. I'm Stuart Shapiro, the Associate Dean of Faculty at the Blaustein School, and the purpose of this podcast is to talk with my colleagues about issues affecting people in New Jersey, the United States, and the world. Over the past couple of weeks, we've discussed the health crisis and the economic crisis that COVID-19 has wrought. Today, we start to look at some of the other societal implications of both of these crises. I'm very happy to be talking to my colleague, Professor Tony Nelessen, who teaches in our highly ranked urban planning program. Welcome, Tony.
Great to be here, Stu.
Tony, can you tell us a bit about your background in urban design?
Sure. My career as an urban designer started really in my sixth year of architecture training, when I got exposed to not doing single buildings for multiple years, but actually doing a redevelopment of a neighborhood. And that really turned me on to the whole idea that, this was more than just a single building, and this was a new profession that was emerging called urban design. Then I worked for Victor Gruen for a while and worked with projects in Tehran, the plan for Tehran, a number of new towns, downtown Hawaii, Kansas City. And it was really multiple sets of buildings and transportation issues combined. And my career has just been like that, from there to Harvard, and then from Harvard to working with a number of other national organizations, multiple new towns, and then returning to private practice of my own, developing multiple new towns in the United States. And I can't tell you how many redevelopment plans. So since my early years, I have been what has been called an urban designer, and was one of the few people to go to Harvard under the urban design program, which really began at that point to hone my skills. And later, after teaching in Harvard, I came to Rutgers and have been teaching urban design there now for, 42, 43 years.
Great. COVID-19 has hit hardest in our cities, New York City in particular, also New Orleans, Detroit. Are you concerned that as a result of this, people are going to start thinking they shouldn't be living in cities, and once again we might see a wave of movement out of cities?
I think that's going to be inevitable for the next couple of years. It's clear to me, given my circumstance with my son and daughter-in-law, living here now, coming out of Manhattan, that there is a certain, and discussion with other folks, that there's a certain fear of things like elevators, congregating
Right.
halls, narrow hallways. And a lot of people have escaped, but unfortunately, many people cannot.
Right.
Now, I think over a short period of time, there will be some of this movement, but I really think that once it begins to, if we beat the curve and we get the 14, 15, 20 days or so of a decrease, I think it's pretty clear to me that because of the resources that the cities have, people are going to move back. There's just too many resources deposited now inside these cities, culturally, socially, economically, physically, interactively, that people inevitably, who are congregating kind of people, will move back. But I think it's going to be a relatively slow progression back. And I think it may take as many as, 2, maybe 3 years.
Right. So we may see a little movement at first, but hopefully that'll reverse itself once the pandemic's a thing of the past.
Yeah, I think, like, for instance, if people are still living someplace else, let's say my son and daughter-in-law living with us, they're still paying rent in Harlem. Everything is still there. And, we've had multiple discussions that said, why don't you just stay here, or buy a place or rent a place here? No. They want to go back. So I think people who are really urban people really have a kind of propensity to want to live in these urban areas, and their jobs are there, their friends are there, the grocery store is there. They know the system. Now, that will not be for all people. Some people will inevitably say, listen, I've had it, but there's been immigration, both in and out migration from cities now for years, depending upon economic conditions and what have you. And this one has a tendency to have hit the cities and the high density areas certainly harder than most.
Right. Now, one of the other big changes that we've seen in the past couple months has been the cratering of gas prices. Some of that's demand driven. We're not driving right now because we can't leave our houses. Some of it is supply side driven. What do you think the implications are for people's choices about how to live their lives?
Heretofore, if you were a city dweller, you might have had a car, but you were primarily a walker or a transit user. I mean, the higher the densities, the greater the use of of public transit. That's worldwide, no question about that. But now that gasoline is now, or oil, let's say not gasoline, because gasoline is still $1.85, maybe $2 a gallon. But oil has fluctuated now. The fear is going to be two fears. One is that once this is over, slowly over the next 2 years or so, and we have this phenomenal surplus now of oil sitting in tankers in the middle of
Yep.
every major harbor, that there is going to be a tendency. Wow, gas is really cheap. We can kind of go back to what we had. But the question is, will there be places for people to go other than the places that they are going to now, like the
Right.
grocery store, drugstore, and what have you? How many restaurants and what have you are going to be open? How many McDonald's on the end of the highways are actually going to actually open or go back to business as usual? I think, Stuart, we're going to see a major decline in the use of the cars, or maybe that's optimistic on my part, but I
Hmm.
just don't see that for the next couple of years, because what are you going to go to that you're not going to now? And what is really fascinating is how people have begun to cope without their cars over the
Right.
last 5 or 6 weeks. It is just, I mean, it's like an urban designer's dream come true.
Uh-huh.
All of a sudden, people are walking, they're bicycling, they're still make it to the supermarket, but that delivery has just been extraordinary. I mean, we
Right.
get anything from baby diapers to avocados delivered now. There's hardly a reason to go. There's hardly a reason to go out. You just simply have to order it, and it arrives. 5, 6, 7, 8 hours later on your front porch. So this adaptation process, that the work at this, or the longer it's there, the more they're going to become used to it, and assuming that it is just, that's normal, it's normative.
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, you mentioned, we're driving to supermarkets. Many of us aren't even doing that. Like you said, we're ordering stuff, and maybe that just becomes a permanent change. Maybe that's how we get our groceries from now on.
It's not just getting the groceries. It's like you can have your prescriptions delivered. You can have
Yeah.
anything now delivered. But that was a trend. I mean, it's so interesting that the retail trend was changing so radically before this virus happened, and now this virus has happened. It has taken this industry and propelled it to stardom. I mean, it's just remarkable
Right.
how efficient it has become. But it had a start. It was like a child walking. You had the child. The child was walking, was starting to move at a rapid pace. Now it's on a bicycle. It's like, wow. It's fantastic to see what happened. And I kind of wonder if people get so used to living at home, walking at home, having the stuff delivered. How many of them will go back for those kind of normative kind of things, go to the restaurant, what have you? But on the other hand, the same thing with work. I mean, the majority of the commute time is to commute back and forth, whether it's to Manhattan or me to back to school. We just got used to driving our cars back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now, it's really been a tremendously interesting learning experience, having to do your courses online, having to
Yep.
interact with students. It has just been quite remarkable, actually. And so I
Yeah.
don't think it's ever going to go back to the normative time. In fact, Stuart, which is really interesting, I commute from Princeton back, and I usually drive back and forth. I've got more free time than I've ever had before. It-
Right.
and also, there's things that you can begin to do with that time you have just you've generated, you now have that you didn't have before. I mean, it's really fascinating as to what's going on. I mean, it's just extraordinary from an urban design and a kind of urbanism perspective.
Yeah, and work. Picking up on your comment on work there, employers are going to figure out. Maybe I don't need this big facility anymore. I can have my people work at home 80% of the time or 90% of the time. Whether it's a university like Rutgers or something else that provides service. Now, some places obviously you need a physical plant for, but you might not. You might see step changes in the way work changes, and that'll change in the way people live as well.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right on that, and that's really but fascinating. But that then also has implications that says, and I've talked to several kind of my designer friends that are still running kind of big offices, and they're saying the big thing that is going to change is that new housing that would be done or retrofitting older housing is going to have a live work studio space inside, built inside in lieu of the den or the extra bedroom. That's going to become a mandatory part of all new planning for housing. Of that, there's no doubt now. There's no doubt about that.
Right. So that's one big change we might see. What other changes in design generally and urban design in particular do you think we will see after the pandemic passes?
I think that there's going to be a greater emphasis on what I will call the walk up. I think that the walk up is going to become a much more of a pervasive element because of two things. One is, let's back up. You remember when the elevators were out at Blaustein and we all had to walk up 5 flights of stairs?
Right.
And we all did it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we complained a little bit, but we all did it. You met people on the hallway, and it was, probably healthier for all of us. But nonetheless, the question is, if you can introduce, which I know people have in Europe, introduce a walk-up, but the caveat is a dumbwaiter. A dumbwaiter means that you bring your case of beer or your groceries, you set it on the dumbwaiter, it goes up, right? You don't have to carry it up. It's all you have to carry up is yourself. So
Right.
that might be one of the things that a much more emphasis upon walk-up units and unit configurations differently. But I also think that there's going to be a very much of a difference in parking ratios. I think parking ratios are going to start to go down because of this. There's no need to have to park that many cars. I think that's going to be very important. And I also think that there may be the question of designing new high-rise buildings very differently than they were before. I really think that we're going to be thinking about high-rise buildings in a very, very different way, perhaps even limiting their height or else breaking them down in increments of 5 stories so you can walk up and down 5 stories within a high-rise building. So those are things that we're starting to think about as ways in which we can begin to do it. But I also think that because human beings are such social congregate animals and have been since the beginning of time, that there's going to have to be ways in which you can leave your home and be on a very positive, what I will call urban walking experience. And I think we really need to rethink now that walking urban experience. And to me, it's really interesting because, for instance, if I take my bike out now, which I've been doing a lot and filming in the little town that I live in, to what these streets are, it's like a bicycle's paradise. There's no parking. I mean, all the parallel parking is gone. And so all of a sudden, the bicycle has free reign. People are walking in the middle of streets. And I think based on the number of things that have been done in other cities now, where they're starting to think about widening sidewalks, for social distance, what have you, but completely closing off more and more and more streets. I would see a
Right. Wow.
possibility that places like Manhattan, Boston, and what have you will start to take entire shopping streets in order to get the social distances and say, listen, for the next 2 years, we're just going to close these streets off. We're going to close these streets off. And
Fascinating.
after the end of 2 years, people are going, we're not going to put the cars back on here. Are you kidding me? We love it the way it is. So these are all things that are starting to think about changes that are occurring. And again, this is not new. It's just that this virus has just accelerated the process. So let's say in New Jersey, Jersey City has got places where they've closed streets off for pedestrian. Somerville has it. There's a whole number of cities that don't have it. But this, like everything else, it's just accelerated the whole thing. All of a sudden they're going, wow, Witherspoon Street has no cars on it. Why don't we just close Witherspoon Street off completely forever and, put little green spaces and coffee? You see what I mean? The whole idea there is that this may give us 2 years to rethink it. Now, it's not going to happen everywhere, but those places that have been more prone to walking and more mixed use, I think are going to thrive. I mean, I think those are the cities that are really going to thrive. Then there's the thing of mixed use, that the idea that the old zoning kind of put everything in its place. So you had retail here and you had housing there and you had higher density housing there, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's also going to go by the wayside. I think people are going to say, why can't I have a daycare facility in my building? Why can't I have, see what I mean? So again, there has been a tendency to move in that direction, but this has just accelerated it. Why can't I have a supermarket, a small little supermarket for my local stuff within walking distance? Why can't I have that? And so I think there will be some of that pressure as well. So to me, it's really an exciting time to rethink the program.
That's great. That's fascinating stuff that I bet a lot of people haven't thought of yet. Looking backward and forward with regards to sort of preparation for things like COVID-19, what could cities have done better, or what should they do better to minimize the number of people that are infected in the future?
That's the most interesting question about that, and it depends upon which side of this debate one is on, or the political debate one is on. I really, honestly, Stuart, think that the whole key was testing in the first place, and I think that the places clearly demonstrated that those places that have had the best results are the places that tested more often and tested more thoroughly with a larger group of population, and then were able to isolate those folks really early on in the game. And I find it interesting because you think about, where it, clearly it came from China, and clearly the whole idea that we stopped the flight from China, and of course that, 40,000 people from China still came in. But if people come from China, they don't fly to Indianapolis. They fly to the major airports in the major cities. So it's just logical. And then they get into a taxi or whatever they do, and it's just logical that if it was spread by air, which they think it was, then wherever you have these major congregating points or wherever people landed, that's what we should have tested. The airports should become a major testing facility. I mean, testing facility. I mean, it's like, okay, we scan people for guns, right? Really? How many times have you gone through an airport checkpoint with thousands of people? And I've gone it worldwide, and I've never seen anybody caught, anybody ever.
Right.
Why couldn't you at the same time check everybody that comes in? Temperature, scans, viruses, the whole thing. There's got to be technology. There is technology to do that. So that would be my first notion, is you absolutely drill down. Now, in the United States, it may be too late. I mean, in the Wisconsin vernacular, the cows are out of the barn. They're
right.
Now the question really is, how in the world do you test 300 million people in the United States and maybe 6 or 7 billion in the world? I mean, how do you do that? And they've been extremely slow at doing that. Although more of these testing facilities are starting to be, put in place, including a new one in Harlem as of yesterday or the day before. It's in Harlem. My God, that's the highest density place. Now, also, the pundits begin to say, well, there's nothing happening in Montana, or there's nothing happening in Iowa, or nothing happening. Well, dudes, the density there is like one person for every 5 square miles. In New Jersey, right. It's the highest density in the United States. It's about density. It's not about the number of people and the size of the place. And so density is the key factor that has to be controlled in this map that we create. You got high density, that's where you have the highest amount of testing that has to be done. And okay, so Montana, it's got a few cases out there. I fully understand that. but they have no density except in Billings and a few other major cities. I mean,
Right.
and even in those cities, because they're so sprawled, don't have many people living in them.
Right. Yeah. Where those places are seeing problems are where they have a big factory and someone has gotten infected, like the pork plant in South Dakota and other meat facilities. There you see sort of artificial density, if you will, work density rather than living density, and that's where you've seen spreads in the more rural areas. Let me wrap up by just sort of letting you go on whatever else you want to talk about in terms of the implications for urban design and design in the wake of this pandemic. Anything you haven't covered yet that you'd like to get in there?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I think are that I'm really, really, really excited about. We have this really extraordinary school, third best school in the country, and we're one of the few schools who also has a major health component built into the school itself. And I think that the kind of the focus of the combination of health and urban design to me is like it just couldn't be better. I mean, I came to New Jersey because I wanted to study sprawl from Harvard. Well, boy, did that turn out to be fantastic, right? And we developed some really good solutions. Now, the thing would be interesting is to see the manifestation of this physical response and a health response in all our studios so that we as a school would become a kind of focus and say, okay, here's a kind of a new urban design with this health bent to it that will indeed train students in the future. Because I know that I've interviewed a number of students already who are really concerned, and I'll guarantee you that next year, the Healthy Cities class, 95% of those kids are going to be interested in how we do it, how we build it, and what the future starts to look like relative to what we're going through now. And I think if we take all of the issues that we talked about, the trends that we're starting in now are being magnified, I think this is an opportunity which is really pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, Healthy Cities has a meaning and an appeal that it didn't have 2 months ago, and a lot more people are going to be interested in thinking about questions to what do we do to keep our cities healthy and use our cities to promote health that didn't ever think they were interested in those questions.
No, I know, and already the Healthy Cities class has already got 85, 85 students in it, and I assume we'll see what happens with next semester. But however that goes, the focusing on the design work, the physical containment that people live in, and the future direction that people may want to go in the future to feel safe, because I think it is as much of psychology as it is marketing. And maybe marketing and psychology are the same thing at this point. But the fact that they're going to be looking for solutions where they feel safe. And then the big serious question is, can we make it through the next 2 years without people getting, really, really angry because we're not moving fast enough?
Right.
That's a big concern of mine, that people
Right.
are already starting to carry guns.
Yeah, that's scary stuff, and there are definitely some scary scenarios here too. Well, thank you very much, Professor Nelessen, for speaking with us this morning. It was a great discussion. You raised a lot of things I hadn't thought of, and I think our listeners will really appreciate it.
You asked some great questions, and you only get good answers if you got great questions. And I thank you and for doing this, just to reach out. It's really good.
Thanks so much, Tony. Also, I'd like to give a big thank you to our production team, Tamara Swedberg, Amy Cobb, and Karen Olson. We'll be back next week. We're going to be talking about transportation implications of the COVID-19 crisis with Professor Bob Noland. Until then, stay safe, and we'll talk to you then. Thank you.